Okay, good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern. Our mission is to figure out the future of smart buildings in the US and around the world. Just in case you're wondering who we are, our profiles are listed on mondaylive.org. Head over there. Just a point to note that views expressed here in this hour are personal, not of any company or organization, so keep that in mind. And also, it'd be good if we can make this as interactive as possible with you guys, with the audience on the Zoom chat. So let's have some conversation around this, especially this week, because we want to have an open conversation about the future. And just in case you're wondering how to get this slide deck, it is also on mondaylive.org, just so head over there. So as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, our focus and our theme for this month is disruption, specifically what is it going to take, or what are the dynamics necessary for disruption to occur in buildings. So a lot more about that in a minute. Just from hang on, I think I skipped. There you go. Agenda, no more chit chat, and then on the disruption front, we thought we'd start this whole conversation with conversation about what a vision could or should be for smarter buildings. So we'll get to that. But before that, hand it over to Ken. What's going on?
Thanks, Anto. I just finished writing my article for Connected Contractor, and the title is Reviewing, Renewing, Real Relationships. And I think this is important, that your knowledge of the past and your connection to the valuable industry relationships is your superpower. Your ability to mash up your past experiences in the new AI-propelled era of environmentation will now define you. I think we've got so much new stuff following on us that I think it is important to take a look at who we are, how we got here, and just basically understand that, because it is of value. It is what it is we do. AI is going to help us. It's going to be a hamburger helper, but it's the people of the industry, I think, are going to define where we're going to be. And I got a great example of that. And one of my old contributing editors reached out to me to help explain some work he's doing with Lawrence Berkeley Labs. And this is this control flow, and he's got this tool that's available to help write specifications that fall into some of the ASHRAE standards. So that's interesting. The other thing is, I got poking around when I was bringing him back on as our contributing editor, and this blast from the past we wrote, that Paul and I wrote in 2006 for Engineered Systems. We were talking about what is an intelligent building, and that's not so different than what is a smarter building. So that's an interesting read as well. The young professionals at C4 SB are holding their session tomorrow. I guess the first one went well, and they're looking to get some more time. They basically used up all of their Zoom time, so they're trying to get that problem solved, and that should be online tomorrow. I think that's the main thing. I think there's real value in just kind of looking over our relationships. I think the thing we all think is that we knew somebody 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 5 years ago, and we kind of remember them in their mind the way we knew them 5 years ago. And of course, they've all evolved. And so it's interesting just to read their LinkedIn profile, see what they're doing now and where their heads are at. I think that could propel us as an industry a lot. Okay, back to you, Anto.
Thank you. Thanks, Ken. So just as a reminder, reminder, I actually skipped this slide. We were dark last week, obviously. We're talking about disruption this month. And then next month, we're going to take a break, the month of August, and we'll return on September 11th. So just keep that in mind for next month. But on my slide, I got a couple of things, and this is going down still the path of what's happening to real estate, commercial real estate. One on the left, I always find these things amusing, visualizing the 1 billion square feet of empty space. That would be, if you put it all in one tower, that would be a tower that is 100 miles high, with an elevator that would need to go up to like 40 something thousand floors. So that's a lot of just to pictorially, just to think about that. That's in the whole world. And even in New York, it's like that will be equivalent of a building of like 7 miles high or something stupid like that. Anyway, just interesting to see that going on. And the other part of it is in the smaller cities, in the mostly middle America, that's also changing quite significantly. And a lot of people are thinking about how it needs to be changing. So that's an article that's sort of reflecting what's happening, not in the big cities, but in the middle of the country mostly. So I thought that was...
Axel, I'm curious on that one. So interesting to see that. And we all know that's sort of the trend. If you were looking at this and you were a business owner in this world, how would you adjust? Would you start developing products and services focused on the tier 2 and 3 and smaller buildings? I mean, is that what this is saying right here? Almost kind of is to me.
Yeah, don't focus on the big towers is kind of maybe the way to think about it, in the downtown type real estate. And kind of strangely enough, that's actually been, I think, the philosophy of many of us on this call actually for a while. So that's kind of...
I saw a really interesting repurposing of property that I wanted to bring up when I was in San Diego last week. We went to donate some stuff at a charity, and the charity office was in a repurposed motel. And every room basically was a separate company that they had repurposed the motel rooms for individual offices. I thought it was a fantastic idea, and it was buzzing with, business all the way around that. It is a great repurposing of commercial real estate like that. So I think we're going to see more of that going on as it kind of gets out there in the market a little bit more.
Yeah, I think we're all too focused on commercial to residential, right? And there are obviously problems with that, but that's one of the things they're talking about here is the other types of uses, not just residential, institutional. That's quite broad and recreational. So yeah, be innovative.
Please, I mean, the obvious mall to pickleball. I mean, that's just a straight line right there.
All right, pickleball man. All right, moving on. Rick.
I think I'm unmuted, and I'll try not to work pickleball into any one of this part of the slide. But the big thing is tomorrow, the young professionals have got their second part of the AI series, and then everybody's going to be welcome to participate in what happens for the rest of the summer. And Monica's on here every week, watching what's being talked about on Monday Live, and it's kind of fun to see the interaction or the sort of how the different organizations are playing off of each other relative to the different themes. Also wanted to talk about the fact that we're now starting to actually tune into what's coming up next year with what will be the Smarter Summit for 2024 and what the agenda will be for that, because it's really only 5-6 months away. And the efforts of the coalition are really focused now on having some really compelling things to be able to, in effect, announce and give more momentum to, as we go into 2024. And the couple things listed on here that were themes of the conversations and some stuff that's been now been written about, the cloud native and the IBD, those are getting a lot of our energy and a lot of attention. And I think they're going to kind of be the centerpieces of what we are talking about as the coalition as we go into this, the last half of this year and the beginning of next year. Making sure people understand the significance of those couple of pieces, understand the fundamental technologies behind it, and how those are going to be great disruptors for our market. So we're starting to get kind of concentrated around a few different things. The young professionals are talking about the same things. Here we are talking on Monday Live about some of these same things, and then the coalition is, got a whole bunch of volunteers that are working on bringing some of these technology concepts to to reality. So excited about how it's all kind of playing together. And then of course, I still owe Ken a summary for all of this and how it all comes together to be able to leverage that asset as well.
Do some writing. That's great.
Do some writing. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rick. And I've posted the link to the registration page on chat, so head over there and make sure you join tomorrow. And also the other thing that you didn't mention, Rick, is that what the young professionals have done is they've actually sort of paired up these webinars in pairs. So 2 weeks ago there was a discussion on AI. It was some presentations. And the idea is that tomorrow's webinar is going to be a discussion about it. So there's no presentation. So they're going to do it like this, sort of going forward, pending feedback, obviously, is to do a presentation. And then the following one will be a discussion about it. That's an interesting new format. So looking forward to that. Some links as normal, and nothing much has changed there. Anything else? Any other thoughts? Anybody want to chime in with? Hearing none. So let's talk about disrupting buildings. And I think most of you would have noticed that picture there and sort of understand why it's there in the context of disruption. And I kind of wanted to sort of explain it this way, is that really, if you think about it, this is obviously referring to Ford's now famous quote saying that if they had asked people, they would have just said they wanted faster horses, right? And he was obviously building a car, right? So what he was saying was that this is what people saw. This is in the world before motor cars. This is all there was. Right, is horses and obviously carriages behind them, and everything revolved around the horse as being the transportation mechanism. But this is what Ford saw, right? That people didn't see, right? So his whole task is, and the whole task of disruption in sort of the way I'm sort of thinking about it, is how to communicate to people what it is that we're trying to build, what it is that we're talking about, without that thing being in existence, right? That's why it's called a vision. It's something that exists in your head. So that's kind of the context of it. We started talking about this disruption 2 or 3 weeks back in the planning call. And we kind of said this the same thing here. For us to be talking about disrupting the industry that we're in, we really need to be very clear as to what it is that we're shooting for. In other words, we need a vision and a framework to think about the vision. So this show this week is really about this, and a discussion about the vision. What we want to propose is the vision that is. I'm having problems with my. There you go. A vision that we want to think of as cloud native buildings. We've been talking about buildings and we've been talking about cloud native for the past few weeks. So we want to sort of put it all together, and together with a nice picture of Dubai there, but that's actually got nothing to do with cloud nativeness. That's just a nice picture with clouds in it. So what is cloud native? And we've actually talked about this on Monday Live a few months back. And I just wanted to re-show the sort of the context of what we mean by cloud native, because it isn't, I mean, the cloud has been around for a while. It has lots of different meanings to different people, and we have a very specific meaning of cloud native, and sort of want to spend some time on that. So what is cloud native all about? And if you track the history of cloud, it all started about 20 years ago with what I think of as a Dropbox era, where the cloud is just somewhere to put stuff, to put files, to put pictures, whatever it is you want, right? A lot of people still use the cloud in this way, right? But we're, in terms of the technology, in terms of the evolution of cloud, we've gone way past that. So this is really not what we're talking about. We're not really just talking about this, although this has some elements of that. The cloud then morphed into what I think of as the SaaS era, is when cloud, public cloud and private cloud were sort of collaborating with each other using OAuth and other things to create services that they could offer to us humans, to users, right? So that's the SaaS era. We're still in the middle of all of that. But the cloud native is not this. This is not what we mean by cloud native, although there are elements of this that obviously relates to cloud native. And a lot of enterprises now do what they think of as hybrid cloud, which is a combination of private cloud, which is clouds owned by enterprises, with the public clouds, multiple public clouds. And that's really sort of the age of a hybrid era. So this is starting to use a lot of the cloud native technologies, but even this is not really cloud native. Cloud native is when you have everything that you need, especially from the context of our industry, from buildings, all on the same platform. That same platform is the cloud. So the cloud becomes the platform. You know, we talk about platforms a lot, and this is a generalized platform for everybody, and that's really what it's a computing platform that is cloud native in the way it behaves. And what that really means is that all of these different types of clouds, public clouds, private clouds, and on-prem clouds, all can communicate with each other using the same set of standards and technologies, same sort of open stuff, web services, REST calls, MQTT, et cetera, the whole bunch of stuff. That's really what cloud native means. And out of that, you get the compute environment where the components of the computing, which is typically input, output, processing, and storage, can actually be anywhere here. So you're not constrained to put an input device just somewhere because of the architecture. The cloud native architecture allows you to put the input anywhere in this whole cloud, right? Which is obviously provides an enormous amount of flexibility. And so goes with the processing as well as storage and the output. So it really then becomes a challenge of how do you orchestrate and how do you manage this, because it becomes really large. Instantly, all of a sudden, everything in the cloud is reachable. So how do you manage that? And one of the things that we talked about and is key to this strategy and this vision is the concept of the IBB, which is the interoperability building box, that the coalition is in the process of specifying. And it really is a container-based mini data center in the building. So what the IBB does, it makes the interaction between a building and the cloud be exactly the same as the interaction of the other clouds, the public and private clouds. Obviously, typically much smaller, but that doesn't really matter. The protocols and the standards that are being used are the same, right? So that's really the beauty of it. And because of that, we can then start to implement very specific building related technologies, such as the sort of the future of BACnet and secured by Symmetrics, the Haystack stuff, the CNSCP that we've been working on, and other cloud native technology. That's really the sort of the important thing about cloud native, is that it enables all of these things to work together with each other. So this is the technology architecture of it. But there's another perspective of cloud native, is just what is it from a non-technology perspective. and just from an overall business perspective. So here's a list that we've actually put together. The first three are kind of technology-ish. The first one is the cloud native building is connected to the private and public cloud infrastructure. In other words, it's connected to the internet and all of the stuff that I talked about earlier. It is inherently connected. Number two, very important, is that the normal operation of it is not dependent on the cloud. In other words, the architecture must be such that it is not dependent on anything on the cloud for the normal things that it needs to do every day, keeping the temperature, keeping the lights on, being safe, etc. And yet it can leverage cloud resources anytime that it needs to, right? So that's kind of the justification for cloud native buildings from a technology perspective. But the next two are kind of really important, is that because cloud native allows you to sort of see everything as one big architecture, it actually provides us a way of thinking about a building to be part of the owner's enterprise system. Owners and building owners that are enterprise companies today all have some kind of enterprise system that manages their assets and people and relationships. And we've always sort of seen the building as being external to that. And I don't know why we've always thought it that way, but cloud native allows us to bring bring buildings, bring those sort of real estate assets to be part of what the enterprise considers as being valuable assets, and manage it and deal with it in a similar way. So that's another angle of that. Number five is that it should also be part of the cloud management ecosystem of the operator, whoever's operating it, either the owner or subcontracted out. Right? So you should be able to, if you've been given the responsibility of managing a building, you should be able to just take that building and plug it into whatever your management ecosystem is, and it should work with very little engineering. That's kind of the way to think about it. The cloud native buildings are managed using tools that are not location specific or not vendor specific. So it's agnostic in those two areas, which is obviously alludes to openness. Cloud native buildings are inherently, because of this architecture, dynamic, scalable, resilient, and secure. All of the things that we really want in assets. And it's almost not worth, it's almost not needed to say this, but all of this is based and on open and interoperable standards, right? So that's really what we talk about, what we mean by cloud native buildings. And this is actually not a foreign concept, right? This sort of, the way we're sort of framing this list of cloud native, because we have it today. Each of us have a smartphone, and the smartphone is in the same way cloud native as the way we're describing buildings. This is exactly the same list. A phone is connected to the cloud. We know that because that's why we have it, right? The normal day-to-day operation is not dependent on the cloud. I can pick it up and make a call, and I'm not actually using the cloud. I can make emergency calls. I can take pictures with the camera. I can do all sorts of things, right? The sort of normal day-to-day stuff that actually is not dependent on the cloud. But when we need the cloud, we can do something and send to the cloud. So everything sort of is not dependent on the cloud being there all the time, but it's dependent on the cloud to satisfy whatever the function that you're trying to do. It's also part of the phone is also part of if my phone is part of my enterprise asset system. And it's also part of my operational, how I run my building. All my health stuff is on there, all the shopping stuff. Right? So it's the same kind of concept, and the other bullet points are the same. So we're already seeing how cloud nativeness works today. Every single day, every time we pull out our smartphone, we're actually using a cloud native thing. So all we're really saying is that transfer that sort of frame of thinking to buildings, and that's really what the vision is. And that is the end of my slides. I'm going to shut up and let people comment on this.
I think the problem I've always had, Anto, with cloud native is the term cloud native. It throws you off a little bit.
I think that's intended.
Yeah, maybe, but yeah, that's the challenge I've had with it. It
Yeah.
seems to imply it's wholly dependent on the cloud when it has very little dependence on the cloud.
Well, it's actually both, right? It's a dichotomy kind of a thing.
Yeah, yeah.
I hear what Anno's saying, though. Most people I talk to, if you bring that phrase up, the
Yeah.
first thing that comes out of their mouth is, I don't want a system that's based in the cloud.
Yeah.
Right? And I think an important part to understand here is we're kind of saying the opposite of that, right? It's a wholly distributed peer-to-peer kind of an architecture here that allows you to not be as dependent on the cloud. You might go to it for expanded features and capability, but not hosted in the cloud, not monopolized by one of the cloud companies only. Those are the kinds of traits I think that we need to remember and stay focused on.
Yeah, I've had this similar problem, Trace, when we mentioned the terms internally.
I was thinking that though, Ron Petsy would love this because he was talking about this for years. So that just came to my mind. The other thing is this, the way you start to tie it together, I think you could continue to deepen this. So it's consumable with this analogy of the smartphone. I said it to you a couple weeks ago. I think it's brilliant. If we continue to deepen and tighten up the language there, I think people will start to see that in a whole different way. I think you're onto something there with that analogy.
So Anto, we talked about this a little bit on, I think, on Wednesday, and you know, Anna was mentioning, as did Tracy, that the phrase cloud native is still very foreign to us in the buildings world, right? So in one of your previous slides, you talked about the cloud native foundation. And it was, but you didn't really explain it. And I think it would be worthwhile just doing a little more
Okay.
color around cloud native as being something that has become very well recognized in the IT world as a term, and what we're essentially trying to do is bring that thinking, that approach into the building world for the reasons, for some of the benefits that you see now with your phone, right? So that the flexibility and the power that you enjoy with your phone, we want to bring that flexibility and power to our industry, and which is why we're pointing in the direction of cloud native as the way to do that. But we're going to have to do some real education and marketing around the term cloud native to get people to recognize, to buy into it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna push back a little bit on that. There's always been terms that have come into our lives or our grandparents' lives that they didn't know what it meant, but it actually meant something. And that's why I'm just laying it out there as a little bit of a challenge. I like the fact that it actually, it's not a term that we came up with. Cloud native foundation, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation is a function of the Linux Foundation. And so it's kind of convenient that when people are confused by the term cloud native, you just say, oh, well, here's the link to the Linux Foundation. And this is the term that is being used for a completely new world of computing architectures. And so we're not inventing anything, we're applying it to buildings.
Yeah, I
It's
agree.
like the
That's
term
I think I was saying
Right.
that right. Yeah.
Yeah, but we had terms like microprocessor. What the hell was, what was that? Nobody knew what that was a few generations ago.
Sure.
We've had other terms that nobody understood. Internal combustion engine, of course, those are gone, but no one knew what that meant a couple of decades ago. And that's why I think we're on solid ground here using cloud native, because it does force the complete rethinking of how software, hardware, communications, and everything happens. And then we're applying it to buildings using our decades of experience to craft how these new architectures are applied to our domain. So I love it as a kind of a challenge.
Yeah, it's a little bit provocative, right? The name, and it's a provocation operation. To use a name that is new in our world, but it's actually not new to the technology world. And it's really where a lot of people in technology are headed, whether you know it or not. I mean, Linux, this is part of Linux, right? And so all of the technology that's being used by all of us today that is embedded in Linux, a lot of them are actually cloud native by their very nature, right? So it's.
And to Bill's point, so the phone is one thing, a Tesla is another. There are more and more cloud native examples that are coming onto the scene that were already being used in other industries, that it's going to make it easier and easier to point to even better and better examples.
Yeah, a couple of, just reading some of the chat. Greg Simar was talking about something that we hope to be talking about in a couple of weeks. We're going to explore this whole subject the rest of the month. So we're going to be talking about what this really means from a technology perspective next week. That's kind of the current thinking. And the week after, we're going to be talking about who's going to do what. How does it sort of change the supply chain of the channel? So we're going to touch on that hopefully in a couple of weeks. Greg, thanks for the question. Matt's comments, a lot of rabbit holes. Yeah. There are, and I think the way to think that is that we're trying to sort of frame all of these rabbit holes. So that's part of the conversation. I'm not sure. I'm not reading from Matt that he's saying that's a bad thing. He's just saying that that's what it is, which is.
Well, and we do know that folks like Microsoft and Google are seriously wanting to be in this particular space. So
He personally loves it. So
yeah.
And I'm looking, Anto, at David Batts, who had the same suggestion that I came up with a couple weeks ago with, hey, let's go with cloud connected. So David, I'm going to suggest that cloud connected is so kind of basic that it's not going to get people to be thinking like, sorry, what the heck is that? The cloud connected, it's connected. What's that? What the heck is cloud native? What do you mean? It doesn't make sense. All of a sudden, they got to go explore it.
There you go. That's the provocation bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I go back to the early 80s, when this industry started with energy management systems, EMCS, then suddenly, all of a sudden, a few years into it, the acronym DDC came up. And people were wondering, well, what the hell's DDC? Direct Digital Control, right? And then within a few years, EMCS disappeared altogether. And everything was, a DDC control system, and then it morphed into building automation. But DDC came over largely from the industrial world. But it's a great analogy because there was no DDC in 1981 in our world. It did not exist. But then by 1985, it was almost a household term in the industry. So nothing wrong.
At the end of the day, when you actually do have the discussion with someone, weirdly enough, it's the thing they actually want, right? When they say that I don't want everything in the cloud, and you go, you're right, you don't want everything in the cloud, and that's why we're doing it like this, with cloud native approach. And then the cell phone's a great example of that. So when you kind of get past that, they actually go, yeah, okay, this is exactly what I'm talking about. I want it to be all when I need to be able to do what I need to be able to do, but we'll leverage the cloud when it makes the right sense, right?
Yeah. One slide that I actually skipped out, I was really having problems with this slide deck, sorry, is this one here. This is a list of, this is not exhaustive, it's not complete, I'm sure, but it's a list of just some of the things we've been talking about as an industry and also on Monday Live, right? We want to provide choice. We want to figure out how to help doing the decarbonization, ESG, manage cybersecurity, et cetera, et cetera. We've actually discussed this, and it's not hard to identify how cloud native buildings help in these things, help or enable it, right? Interoperability, for example, cloud native is actually interesting because it's enabled by interoperability given to us by IT, but it also enables interoperability if you do it right? Because everything becomes compatible just by the nature of using standardized communication methodologies. So that's kind of one way to think about that. AI and ML. If you think about AI, ultimately, an AI is a thing. It's something that does something. It's almost like an application in the smarter stack, right? So it's a thing that exists somewhere. And today we're all excited about ChatGPT, and it's obviously a cloud-centric AI tool, right? But we're starting already to see AI and especially ML being implemented up and down the stack, all the way from somewhere in the public cloud, all the way down to the edge into the IBB, right? So AI components can actually be anywhere they need to be, and cloud nativeness will actually be the mechanism to connect them all. I can sort of go on to in this list, but it's just wanted to bring up the sort of the thinking about this from different aspects that are actually important to people.
You know, Anto, when I look at the original slide, the first few slides that you put together and how you built the story, and the reason I know you're onto something is you could plug that very same story into water, wastewater, traffic systems,
Right.
Oil and gas. I mean, the same things happening. So it's really a well thought through first few slides, man.
I think
Mark,
the other thing it does. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to chime in on Mark's comment. Cloud native containerization. What's the difference? Containerization is containerization. I would say that containerization is a cloud native thing.
Yeah.
That's the way I would think about it. There are other things like Docker and web services, things that are also cloud native. Containerization is the mechanism by which an application or a service can be managed in a data center.
Maybe what we ought to do is build a cloud native car. And so the components of the car, the wheels are, the containerization, and the engine is something else, but, basically build up the components that make cloud native. And I'm throwing out a silly comparison, but in essence, there are going to be some very identifiable features or components that make cloud native.
Actually, that's a pretty good idea, right, Steve? Is one, I think cars are an analogy, right? But we could actually come up with a simple application, Anto, over the next few weeks to see how it all comes together, right? Just something simple, not complex. One of the other things I think that will show as we go into it and dig more into the details, I think the other thing that will show is that the IBB is not the gateway, right? That everyone's, there's a fundamental difference between a basic gateway type approach and what we're talking about with IBB.
Yeah, I think Matt White just sort of touched on that. Potentially somebody abusing it by saying, I've built something and it's cloud native. Challenge me, kind of a thing. I think on something like the cloud native thing, I think because it's so broad, it's going to be really difficult to do that, because you've effectively got to reinvent everything to make that argument. I don't know.
Well, you can imagine something like this with a sticker on it that every time any manufacturer puts something out, it's cloud native certified, something like that. You can see that happen. Like that's cloud native.
Yeah, and just looking at Greg's comment from Greg. Yeah, I'm going to stop the share and just continue the convo here. Any other thoughts?
Will it evolve to a plug fest of clouds?
Plug fest of clouds. Is that the plural term of Cloud native applications.
That a plural with?
Is that the plural term for a cloud native applications plug fest? So a plug fest of clouds, I should say.
Well, just the fact, how do we ensure all this stuff does work together? You know, like
How does anybody, how do you can ensure that when you go to a website, a TurboTax website that somehow is connected to your bank website, how do you know that that's cloud native? And it's probably a clumsy comparison, but what I'm trying to say is that the internet and a lot of things that we're actually doing today is inherently cloud native. I'm not sure there's going to be a test like a BTL mark that says you're cloud native. I'm not sure is that kind of a thing.
But that's a cloud native, okay? But a lot of the IoT stuff, I know that we talk about in all this. But what it's not, all that stuff that's cloud native, it's not interoperable, which is the way things have to go. So this is almost cracking that door open where if you want to be cloud native, you got to play well with others. You just can't be a silo anymore. So,
There you go. So it's
Right.
really, it's by definition not possible to be proprietary.
yeah.
Right.
David Cass asked about Matter. Matter is the thing that came out of the CSA, the Connectivity Standards Association, that came out of this Zigbee work. It's very different. Matter has a very specific purpose of normalizing IP devices and targeting the home. I'm not sure whether one could argue that it is cloud native or not cloud native. I haven't thought about it from that perspective, but it's not what we're talking about here.
It's not what we're talking about, but and I'm not exactly sure what matters, but what I'm hearing is, if you put matter aside, if your zeitgeist is interoperability, cloud, not cloud, whatever, you've got to start designing stuff that just works with others, man. So in a sense, it might be like that.
Yeah, in that sense, it helps things working together in the home networks.
Yep.
I think that if you look at the phone analogy carefully, the adoption of technology was based on platforms. Certainly there were early Microsoft platforms, then there was the iPhone and the Android platforms. But really, what really drove the adoption were applications, right? And I think that that is the key here as well. Certainly, as Anto pointed out, you didn't need any of this to use your cell phone because that was its own ecosystem. And when early phones had cameras in them as well. But it's when the linking of applications that people wanted to use were where the value was exhibited by having that cloud behavior, calendaring, other things. That's where the power came from. And that's where the adoption came from as well. And I think that just having a platform is a nice start, but finding those killer applications that provide value to people are how this kind of technology gets adopted or not.
Get that.
You're muted, Rick, if you're trying to talk.
So there was another technology that was competing that did have a lot of those apps, and $20 for who can come up with the name of the company. It doesn't, I don't think exist anymore, that had killer apps, but they did not have an open approach to opening up for the more apps, and they had a very proprietary. Ta-da! So they had the killer apps, they had the calendaring, they had the phone calls, they had cameras, they had a bunch, texting, but they didn't have a platform that was extensible. It was so interesting that you brought that one up, because we all thought that our BlackBerries, it's like, why do I need an iPhone? Because I already had all the apps. And then, you said name some of the other ones that came out with a more open approach to the technology, and that allowed for the explosion of the app and for 99-cent apps.
Yeah, and you can sort of even trace that through time, right? BlackBerry started, and then iPhone came along, which was more open because they had an app store. right? It was actually not open. iPhone it's not based on open architecture, operating system and everything else, right? So it became, from BlackBerry to iPhone, it became more open. And then from iPhone, it went to Android, which is even more open, right? So the trend is just more open means better. And now there are obviously a billion or so Android phones.
We're trying to skip the whole Apple adventure part of the evolution.
Take note, Rick.
Yeah, but what Jim was saying about the applications, I'm not worried about people coming up with applications. That's not the problem. The problem is, can those applications access the data? And today they can't. So you can't discover it, you can't subscribe to it, you can't get to it. So from cloud native, to me, has to solve that problem. So that the data becomes accessible. Then people are going to get really creative and really fast about creating applications.
Yeah.
Because there's they can build applications overnight, literally. So, but if you can't get to the data, then it's all moot.
Well, that's exactly what happened with the iPhone when they opened up the store, the App Store, right?
Right.
Once they opened up once I had access to all the sensors and devices on the phone, which is really interesting, right? Because back to Anto's model.
Exactly.
I'm making cloud native applications using.
You knew the
sensors on
location of the phone. You knew the users of the phone.
Yeah.
Right. You knew their preferences. You had access to the
sensor
data.
data. I got the camera. I got the on off. But if I wanted to, I could also tap into the cloud and access some of the power of the cloud if I wanted to. And that's the point that we're making here, right? Is that, which is why I like the phone analogy. But I do think I like Steve's concepts, and we could probably talk this on Wednesday a little bit, Anto and team, is should we do this as build a simple app type example that might help?
Yeah, maybe that's just the IBB because that's all of that will actually emanate from that. Just interesting, Matt made some comments about the different cloud providers and how they fit into this. I would actually say that one of the motivations for cloud native is that it allows people to be not locked into AWS or Azure or Google,
right?
Which are now the three utilities.
Yeah, let me just extend on that, right? Because the trap that the cloud guys do for you is they provide you with a lot of tools in the cloud, right? They make things very simple, but that's the trap and the lock-in. The tools that they give you, which they give you for free to do really good stuff really fast, means you're locked into that stuff, right? That's their model. It's brilliant. So when you think about the cloud native, if you basically can circumvent those suite of tools, in other words, are you providing other ways of doing the same thing more efficiently, then you basically got to
Mark.
And comment that Greg made, construction silos preserve. Yeah, I think so. I think that's kind of, it's not are the construction silos preserved but collapse by this new interface. Yeah, that's an interesting way of thinking about it. It's preserved because they need to be preserved, but collapse because you can then aggregate and use the data from the different silos for whatever they can benefit the owner or operator. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Any other direction?
What was that, Ken?
Would we see this evolving to a IBB app store?
Well, the IBB is an interface between the building and the cloud, right? So it's an IBB. I mean, one way of actually, I've been thinking about the IBB a lot lately. One way to think about the IBB is it's like your cable box in your house, right? We all have a cable box of some sort. And the reason why we have a cable box is that we don't have a Netflix box and an HBO box and a CNN box. That would be absolutely crazy, right? We have this thing called, we have one box and everything goes through it. So the IBB is kind of an aggregator. I think that you're sort of raising the concept of how do we make a marketplace. I think a marketplace would use that that tool, the IBB. I'm not sure the marketplace is IBB itself any more than the cable box that you have is not really how you choose the channel that you're watching. What you're watching, you're using it to choose a service that is really a sort of a marketplace. It enables.
But there's a key point there, Anto, that I think I was trying to make earlier. I think by going through the tech in the next few weeks through these sessions, one of the things that's going to pop out is how different the IBB is to a gateway as we know gateways today, right? The gateways as we know today are more a function of trying to quote unquote integrate data. And you said the right word, whereas IBB is more about data aggregation for services. And they're fundamentally different things,
right?
As a result. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that, which will help us sort of differentiate between IBB and standard gateways that people have today. Because again, just to bring up my favorite subject, you know, every IoT guy has their own gateway out there, you know, that they've got installed. They're doing exactly what you said earlier. They're doing the CNN box and the Netflix box and the, you know, and I don't want all those boxes, right? In fact, there's a term that's now come out. It's called what do they call themselves? Sensor shock and IoT shock. You know, because just the number of stuff that gets stuck on a wall these days. So I think that'll come out as we kind of go through the examples and some more of the deeper dives.
All right.
Mark, you've been very quiet. Is this starting to shape itself into something, or give us your 2 cents worth?
For me right now, no, it's not.
Okay.
There's a lot more that needs to kind of look at and go from there. Per my earlier comment about containerization and all that, as for me personally, it's still a lot that I don't know if it's a viable concept or not. I don't know. It looks to be, but again, without, you know, further thought, and then where do like the controllers fit in, or do they not, like the IP controllers and all this other stuff fit into a model such as this, as an example?
So can I pick off that example? That's to me, that's similar to asking, what is the microphone on the phone? How does that relate to the phones back in the 1980s and the phones in the smartphone, right? It's still a microphone. It's still doing the same thing, right? But the data is being made available in sort of the AT&T days. The data is only being made available to AT&T and the other person in the other end.
Right.
Right. Whereas in today's smartphone, that microphone can be used by Anno if he wants to write an app, or anybody else, and could even be used without anybody doing anything to listen to you.
Like they are right now.
So it is, you know, I think we all recognize that this is a mind shift, and mind shifts are inherently sort of difficult to sort of explain. That's why we try to create a vision around it.
It takes time, you know, so.
Yeah.
Well, and I think this to the opening slide points, this is it's a shift, right? It's like we said right at the beginning, you know, I can't remember who posted it, but someone, you know, the original automobiles were called horseless carriages. So we use terminologies to try and help people shift concepts, right?
Right.
Yeah, Greg made another interesting comment on chat. We're going to collapse the silos, standard interface. Yes, standard interface, standard web, not web, cloud native interfaces. That's really the answer there. Exposing the appropriate cloud native interfaces will enable the silos to be able to work with other silos. You almost don't need to go beyond that.
just to wrap up the conversation around the term cloud native and why it's really good for us to stick with it. We said this month's about being disruptive. The degree to which you're disruptive is the degree to which you're uncomfortable.
There you go.
So the more uncomfortable you feel when something like this is talked about, you're probably on the right track to being disruptive.
And then isn't there a question that, are you being disruptive, or can you leverage that to disrupt, so that you disrupt becomes part of what you're doing? Is that not kind of the $1 million question? In other words, if you don't do anything, you're going to be disrupted. If you're going to keep on riding horses, you're effectively going to be overtaken by cars, one after the
Right.
other.
Right. Yeah.
But I
Yeah,
think
and-
it's potentially a conscious decision. I decide to be disruptive, or I can't
Yeah.
handle that. And
But don't forget, so the one lesson that Henry Ford, remember Henry Ford was the guy who said, you know, if you ask the market, they'll just tell you, I need a faster horse, right?
Right.
And then having brought the car out, if you guys don't know, there were active American government programs in place to make horses faster, genetically alter them, change their food, a whole bunch of stuff. So there are people who will have, you know, who will always have some investment in the horse industry, you know, which is not an insignificant industry at that time, who will try to make their horses faster in the process. So just heads up.
yeah, expect that here.
Super relevant, Hanno, super relevant.
Yep.
That's
It
why
almost is to what Matt just said right here, in some way.
All right, guys.
I'm just trying to read that. Matt, it's a long. Maybe we'll yeah. That's kind of. I think
Let's
that's-
capture it for the discussion. I think it's good.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and that's, speaking of horses, that's why Churchill Downs is under investigation for those 12 or 13 horses.
Oh, yes.
All right, so I guess they were trying to be disruptive, right?
Your horses might die. Is that what you're saying, Mike?
Yeah.
Inexplicitly die.
Okay, anybody want to have a quick wrap? A minute or so? Anybody compelled? I'm going to pick on Jim because he hasn't been very vocal today.
Well, I think that we have a lot of ground to cover here. The IBB is the first concrete step we're taking. And I think that disruptive technologies need to have a reason to be. And the applications that will spur that on will come. And I'm looking forward to taking the next steps. I think it's also interesting that we haven't talked about who will be disrupted, but I think it's not limited to one group. The disruption we're talking about is actually fairly broad here. As Anto mentioned, there are cloud participants, potentially controls incumbents, lots of different kinds of disruption, service providers that have staked out models. Anyone with in the IoT business with proprietary platforms, as Anno pointed out. So I think that's another thing we'll come up on over time is who's actually being disrupted. But
Who's the horse industry here?
exactly.
Okay, great.
Love it.
So let's bring this to a wrap. So next week we'll talk about what this means, the sort of the components of this disruption and the components towards cloud native. And the week after, we're going to talk about who is being impacted by that. And then the last week, we'll sort of do a wrap up and come to some conclusions. So with that, I'm going to bring this to a close. Thank you everyone for being here. Thanks for the attendees as well. I'll get the video of this up tomorrow. And other than that, have a wonderful week. It's going to be hot everywhere, especially in Phoenix, but Tracy's gone. So
He
keep
melted
cool.
He melted.
Keep cool across the country. All right.
All right.
Bye-bye all.
There you go.
Bye.